say thanks for coming to Rail Talk, Skin versus Chemicals. This is Greenwell's third webinar this summer. We have looked at radiology and the pursuit of sustainability in that field. We've looked at plastics from a variety of perspectives, and today we're looking at skin and some of the ways that it intersects with sustainability, climate, and also chemicals. So I'm going to kick this off by asking Dr. Parker to introduce herself, and then we'll go to Allyson and Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Eva Parker. I'm a board certified dermatologist, and I practice at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allyson Brennan. I was a neurocritical care pharmacy specialist for 13 years at Centennial Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, before I started a naturally derived skincare company called Imogene Co, also here in Nashville.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I'm founder and CEO of Do Mighty. 15-year background in launching skincare products and the science of skincare before starting Do Mighty and running this company for 6 years. And we're a natural-based, pure, active, waterless, refillable, plastic-free skincare line.
That's awesome. I am Holly. I'm with Greenwell. I'm also an editorial director at a health system, and I am very near the end of my MS in sustainability with a focus on kind of corporate metrics and comms. So to kick this off, I would like to hear from our attendees in chat what kind of healthcare you're in or what brings you here today. That's going to help us kind of know which direction we're going to head. I would like for each of you to explain how and why you decided to pursue the sustainability overlay to your careers. Each of you could have taken a path and decided that was not worth your efforts, but you have certainly you each have a very specific set of credentials. So Eva, let's start with you.
Thank you, Holly. So I think my path into climate impacts and opportunities for sustainability in healthcare are really rooted in my undergraduate degree, which was in environmental science. And so that's really where this stems for me. And I think it's important to say that sustainability is pretty concrete when I think about skin. So skin health and environmental health aren't separate conversations. I think they're one and the same. And I'm so glad to be here today to have that conversation.
For myself, having worked in a hospital for almost 2 decades as a pharmacist, I saw single-handedly how single-use plastics generate an enormous amount of waste. And, necessarily a lot of these are for patient safety and sterility, but it gave me a much greater appreciation for how these decisions impact us down the line. So when I started Imogene Co, I knew that the packaging and sustainability of not only our product, ingredients and the stability within our formulations, how that would be very important in what we chose with packaging and our e-commerce shipping procedures, but how that also would impact the integrity of the ingredients as well. So it became a very important piece of our brand as we built it.
Hi, and for me, it's a little bit complicated, but if I condensed it down, I feel like as someone who studied biochemistry throughout my undergrad and then sort of fell into the beauty industry, starting with raw materials and also suffering from lifelong eczema, I was always formulating my own products, even though I was calling on the largest brands. And somewhere along the 15 years of doing that before launching Do Mighty, there was a bit of an aha moment where I realized, you put together all the pieces of what goes into a product, like what's in packaging, why things are done a certain way. And it really comes you full circle back into this might not be sustainable. It might not be the best for my skin. It might not even be the best to contribute lifelong benefits into my routine every day. And so it made me deep dive and dig quite a bit further into why we were working with certain large brands and like how things perform. And it actually just made me a passionate and avid researcher of materials and just further information based on that. So sustainability is a bit more of an acquired almost habit and love for me, where science has always been my background. So now it's like fully integrated really into my company, into my full life, and a lot of every decision that I make every day.
I always ask this, whether it's in kind of my day to day life or on these webinars, because I personally believe that no one person is going to go out here and save the planet. We're not, no one on this call is going to, and most likely going to invent the one technology that's going to suck all the carbon up, right? But everyone has a role in sustainability and making an impact. And from the Greenwell perspective, it takes the collective moving in the same direction. And we can't all be the hero, right? We need to work together as a team and bring as many people into the conversation and the campaigns as possible. So it's always, and I'm looking forward to having you guys talk to maybe a group that's not as accustomed to hearing from the beauty or the skincare line, because healthcare has kind of is definitely lagging in its sustainability efforts. And I think it can learn a lot from the industries that are adjacent, but making a lot more strides. So with that, let's set the stage with you, Dr. Parker, and talking a bit about how chemicals interact with skin and how that intersects with climate, greenhouse gas emissions, and all that.
Thank you, Holly. It's a great question. So, I think we have to put this into a larger context and think about skin as our largest organ and the primary interface with our environment. And so, heat, extreme weather events, UV exposure, air pollution, and of course, the chemical load that we put on our skin and in our bodies are all environmental exposures that have measurable dermatologic consequences. And so for me, this is really a clinical imperative, and we should treat the environment as really kind of a key patient-facing variable when we're considering what we are recommending to our patients and how we're treating their skin disease.
What is it you say to patients who come in and are saying, so what's actually safe to use?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I think there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace and certainly a lot of greenwashing where terms that really have no medical or scientific definition, like chemical free or green or all natural, are really, I think, muddying the waters and make it very confusing for patients. So I think where the research probably intersects with this idea of green beauty is when we look at things like endocrine disruptors. And there's a growing body of evidence showing things like parabens, phthalates, bisphenols, triclosan, and UV filters like benzophenones that are in our sunscreens are maybe perhaps interacting with our bodies in a way that may not be safe or healthy. I will say this is a nascent area of research, and so we're still learning. And while there's a lot of associations with things like carcinogenesis and disruption of our hormone balances and even reproductive effects and potential even implications for early puberty and of course potential for skin disease as well, there isn't causation yet. And so that's sort of the missing link in the gap. So when people ask me what's safe, I tell them probably the best thing is a simple regimen, not overly complicated. The more you put on the skin, the more potential exposures that you're having. having, looking for things that are fragrance free. And instead of looking at the front of the label marketing, turning over the package and looking at ingredients and looking for major categories that are either in the product or not listed, things that I mentioned like parabens and phthalates, fragrances, and other ingredients.
And Tiffany, that brings me to you and your background. We had a really dynamic discussion in our pre-chat about kind of the oil to skin pipeline, right? I was wondering if you could break that down for our odd audience who maybe not have thought about the fact that a lot of dead dinosaur is actually going into their skincare.
That's an interesting way to put it. And I have been thinking a little bit more about how to break this down in a way that makes sense. But I couldn't agree more with Dr. Parker's statement to really emphasize that depending on the simplicity or the complication of the number of materials you're putting on your skin, but also the dosage and the frequency, and kind of, if you think right now, just to plant a couple of seeds, to some of the marketing tactics that are used on younger kids these days to use earlier and more frequently, you start to really want to come back to the beginning, or at least I did, especially when creating the products that I have for not only myself, but for Do Mighty. And there has been a long-term stronghold on the industry in certain regions of chemicals, right? So if you look back on like what came prior to World War II industrialization, you had the discovery of plastics, and you also had the discovery of ingredients that come from petroleum, and they've been deemed safe. There is a lot of research, but now they're finding, due to the amount or the exposure of some of these ingredients and the cleanliness of them, let's say, like, are they triple refined? We have now several decades of using products that are safe for certain things like wound healing, but now they're coming into daily contact with ourselves. So I can't agree more that you should be turning over the label and looking at what the ingredients state on the back. But especially in the US, I think what really drove me to wanting to do better and to create different product lines around this thought process is that oftentimes raw materials secretly, especially in the US, hide some of the ingredients you want to avoid. And I kind of love that Dr. Parker brought this up, in that they hide in the ingredient list because in fragrances, you're not required to break out every single product. So you don't know if you're putting synthetics in there. You also, from the petroleum industry and beyond, and you also don't know what kind of stabilizers and preservatives are in individual raw materials. In our labeling guidelines used here, really all you're required to talk about are the items that are not considered to be manufacturing aids and some of this. So, even trying to avoid them or knowing what they are can be difficult for the common consumer turning over the label. And if you also look at some of the information based on the products right now that are heavy in petrochemical technology, there hasn't been many recent studies of safety, right? They're all conducted decades ago. They're all based on research done by the company selling the products. So there is a little bit of incentive there to only find good findings. And if you look at really how much of the oil industry, older numbers, but they exist, 2021, if you look at like ExxonMobil's amount of oil based on just packaging and ingredients, some of which go into the beauty industry, it's 30% of their business. So they have a high need and profitability to deem it safe, have more production, promote single use throwaway instead of refill, And now in the last, I would say 10 years, we're finding that that leads to microplastics in every edge of our environment, which increases our exposure. The packaging stability and compatibility to launch a beauty care product and even food products does not require testing to show if there are incidentals that are coming and leaching from linings and packaging into the product. Um, there's just so much to unpack there, but just to give you like the highlights. And in my perspective, if we were going to look at from beginning to end, like what makes the biggest impact in that, it would be to try to limit your exposure and to look at things that have authentic information and full ingredient decks. And the only place, honestly, that does authentic, like full ingredient decks because it's a part of their regulatory standards are places like the EU. So it is interesting that we are getting this wave of US companies talking about that they're adhering to an EU standard and eliminating the banned materials that are in the EU and seeing what's in their products, especially if they're a large corporate company and they produce something here and the EU, whether it be food or beauty, because then you can compare the two and see like what the major differences are and why something might be ingrediently or compositionally different in one region of the world but sold here in the US. So I mean, there's just so much more I could touch on, but I feel like that's what I would love to contribute. Like people thinking about how it started, why it came to be, why the testing is so prevalent, and the first real ingredient that was discovered to be used like commercially or mass was petrolatum, and then eventually was purchased by Unilever, who really like propelled the use of it safely for daily use and told everybody wound
That's
healing and
Vaseline, right?
Vaseline. Yes, I should
Vaseline.
list.
Let's go ahead and say what
Yeah,
people
the word.
actually know that as. Yeah.
And I have to say, yes, for wound care and for certain things where you need occlusion, there are uses for it. But was it ever really tested to come into contact with skin? Daily use, lips, eyes, masking, carried in your pocket. That's where it becomes, dosage versus frequency. And can we say that every version of it is triple refined and of the highest level so that we're avoiding the cyclic hydrocarbons that are the problematic items? Or should we just avoid it because, why even come into contact with the aromatic hydrocarbons at all, which is what you're worried about from the incidentals of something like a Vaseline or a petrolatum. And just from there, obviously, like petroleum derived ingredients are numerous. So we did write a blog if you're very interested to see it, but many water-based gels, which are occlusives from hairspray, like you're going to bring up a little bit later, come from those technologies, right? PVPs, acrylates, vinyl polymers, things that you might see on a label on a pretty regular basis, but weren't really sure what they were used for. So there is a big stronghold in the beauty industry using these ingredients for that reason. And plastic is just one part of it as the packaging. The ingredients are a secondary part as well to think about for everybody.
And Allison, that brings me to you. We talked a good deal about how you vet every ingredient that goes into your product and even back to the farm it was grown on. And I think that in the US, whether it is food or applied to the skin, we don't have as a culture a great understanding of what we do to soil or what we put into soil eventually comes back to us either through consumption or topical. So I would love to hear from you talking about how you vet the ingredients, your chemical data sheet, and that really aligns with like the LCA or the HPD that you see in kind of on the corporate product side. So talk about that.
Sure. So, as a pharmacist, because my background, I never really lose that pharmacist mindset. I don't simply look at an ingredient just because it's trending. I look at its entire journey, from when it's grown to how it's extracted, how it's tested, how it's processed, and then ultimately how it comes to us as a formulator before it ever is used in a formulation. So, every botanical ingredient that we use, because we are a naturally derived company, so very heavy on botanical compounds, there's a process that we use as a company as we are considering a new botanical compound. We start with a technical review. We are evaluating everything from the certificate of analysis, the chemical data safety sheet. We go into allergen testing. We will ask for heavy metal testing. A lot of people stop there and they might go a little further into pesticide screening, but I'm a daughter of a farmer, and so this goes very deep into my roots. And so, what I like to do is ask a lot of questions about the agricultural practices that are a part of the life cycle of this botanical compound. Harvesting methods, environmental stewardships, these are all part of that conversation because the quality of that botanical compound and how it works in a skincare formula doesn't start with the final product. It starts with how that compound was grown. An example that I know I gave you, Holly, is an ingredient called bakuchiol. I'm sure Dr. Parker and Tiffany have heard of this ingredient. We use that in some of our formulas. It's a perfect example. So this is a derivative of a plant called the bokchi plant. It is a native plant to Asia, mainly China and India. It's been used for centuries in traditional medicine there. And the way that it's kind of made it into the skincare industry, mainly in Western society, is as a retinol or retinoid alternative because it's better tolerated. It is a natural version of a synthetic ingredient. It's generally recognized as breastfeeding and pregnancy safe. And it works beautifully. The thing about bakuchiol, for us, because it's not something you just order on a website, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that go into this technical review and evaluation that we do as a company. It's become increasingly popular, and with that popularity becomes a growing global demand. And when there's a global demand of something, you as a formulator or as a company owner, we want to make sure that those practices on how this is being harvested can sustain the need for that ingredient. I think that responsibility comes with that. So if bokchi is harvested irresponsibly, if it is leading to soil and water mismanagement and erosion, deforestation, and basically from the wild plant populations, which is where bokchi usually comes from, if there's no proper land management, then that puts pressure on that native ecosystem. And if there is pressure on that native ecosystem, there's no way that it can sustainably be used in the future. Nature is something that is very important to Imogene Co. And nature provides some incredible ingredients. And part of what my ethos is nature provides in science is what helps us understand how these compounds work in the skin, how they can effectively work for improving the health of the skin as an organ, as Dr. Parker was saying. And so responsible sourcing is what ensures that this is going to still be available in the future, especially if it's an ingredient that is a really well received and efficacious ingredient. So, with Imogene Co, we are rooted in science and we're backed by nature. And part of that is also knowing that we are going to improve not only customer like health of their skin, but also environmental health as well, which comes down to all of these manufacturing and agricultural practices.
Um, So I want to take this back for a second to a scenario or a campaign that probably most everyone will recall, but the hairspray kind of campaign back in, I want to say, the 90s, when people loved the big hair, didn't care, but they were also getting the big hair by using aerosol hairspray. And it was one of those things that probably people don't use it as much now, but there was the whole ozone hole that mostly did get repaired, and people stopped using a lot of those aerosols. And so I'm curious from your perspective, what is a modern equivalent that is a product or a habit that seems small, but at scale makes a really big impact? And I will open this up to the floor to see who wants to go first.
I can make one comment actually that might just be a fun story to kick it off of hairspray because I was working with some very large brands past the 90s, but as the VOC, volatile organic compounds, were not eliminated fully, but limited here in California, especially. There were some very large salon brands that had to figure out the balance between performance and limiting VOCs by eliminating the level of alcohol and propellant in their sprays, even the pump sprays. And so it became quite a race to figure out how to continually deliver performance product to the consumers, but with limited packaging that would deliver the same style of spray. And it kind of brings me to, I guess, what I would say my most used and recommended start to anyone who wants to be more sustainable is to find the easy products in their life that they come into the most contact with that are throwaway and wasteful and not really a circular thought process, and to just buy better and fewer and something that might be more refillable or longer lasting. It kind of brings me to basically recommending, if anyone is listening to this and hasn't visited perhaps a sustainable boutique or refillery style store, they tend to now exist in almost every town across every state of the US. And they focus on the better ingredients, the deep dive, so you don't feel overwhelmed, and the idea of refill and not throw away. So you're just buying fewer but better. And that's a really good start, even though it sounds a little bit like not specific, because each person consumes at a different level. And especially here in the US, we consume 8 times the amount of product than other countries of the world, and that's quite a bit of resource. And on top of that, that means we're creating just that much more waste once the product is finished and it's thrown away. So just my fun little story for the for the VOC part of it too.
And Tiffany and Allison, I'm not sure which site this was on, but one of the it could have been both, but you know how many times your average bottle gets refilled, is that correct?
Well, at
Might
least
be
for our
Tiffany's.
company, yeah, I was gonna say, at least for our company, we track that on a yearly basis. Our products are waterless format, and they're obviously solid for our serums and a powder for our cleanser. And the pure format also means less need of use. So we have measured by application study testing of the average face size and décolletage, how many bottles one of our bars would replace. And I'll just kind of show really quickly, like this is my personal one that I'm swiping on my skin right now for our everyday vitamin C hero. That every bottle is equal to a 30 ml, is 1 bar is 2 bottles of 30 ml. And we track it every year. So we have just at the end of last year was able to track 100,000 bottles saved from the landfill, and our average consumer refills 4 times right now. And obviously, that number will go up as our company grows and exists for a longer period of time. And the reasoning behind that, obviously, is that we're always acquiring new customers that are starting and then they refill. But the container can be used almost for anything. And we've even developed other unique containers that stack together so that, if you're a traveler, you basically can put all of your products in your full routine together in a very easy, like metal format. So that's important to us as a part of our sustainability, not only just to be waterless for the sake of waterless, but that transparency of the pure format ingredients with nothing hidden, plus the ability to refill, and that our customers love our product so much that the container can just be reused over and over again 4+ times. I mean, my containers have been years old. I haven't changed my containers in 6 years.
Al
So yeah.
Allison, what about you?
One thing that comes to mind, and I think Tiffany is totally going to understand this, and she's thought about this obviously, is the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned like the hairspray. For me, what I see a lot of, because we also private label for dermatology clinics, is the one-time use pads, the cotton pads in a plastic jar. Consumers are very comfortable with these. For anyone watching, this would be like an oxy pad, right? That you might see over the counter. Usually it's 50 to 60 pads in a plastic jar. And the amount of single use, not just plastic, but also the cotton rounds that this creates is immeasurable in the skincare industry as a whole. So that is something that we have always voided. We don't offer that packaging when we're doing private labeling. And Tiffany is working with containers that can, the ingredients in her products can still stay intact, right, and stable within a reusable tin. For Imogene Co, when I was considering sustainability within our packaging, glass was what we chose to use. So, being a pharmacist, it's not only just for the brand of an apothecary type brand, but it's also a huge important decision based off formulation for us because of our botanical compounds. So, many of the botanical derived compounds that we use are very volatile to light, to heat, and to oxygen, to air. So opening a container back and forth, like if it was a single-use plastic with cotton pads, that would make the majority of what our ethos is with our botanical compounds. It would make them inactive, which could then oxidize and actually cause harm to a patient. So I say patient, I'm used to saying customer, patient. They're interchangeable for me. So they have very fragile antioxidants, polyphenols, plant compounds, and glass is by most design inert, which means that those ingredients are not going to interact with that. So our focus is more in this glass. We're about 90% glass. The other 10% is aluminum tins, which are fantastic for our products that are not feasibly put into a glass bottle. And then also 100% biodegradable paper tubing. I have a lot of customers that will ask over and over for, could you put your resurfacing liquid solution in a pad for ease of use? And there's a big reason why we don't, which is what we're talking about here. I have customers that will ask to put things in paper in plastic tubes rather than the paper tubes, like our lip conditioner, our lip and cheek tints. And there is an actual reason as to why we don't do that as well. So I think where glass is not practical, there are other options as Tiffany uses and the aluminum and the biodegradable paper that we use. But as an e-commerce brand, and Tiffany understands this as well, is with glass comes shipping and sustainability challenges. Okay, so glass is heavier. It costs more to ship. It is more of a fragile product than plastic. So you really have to consider in transit how you're keeping these products safe for your customer, but also for you as a brand as well. So there's been times that we have had to redesign our process. I mean, the way that we are testing our products, and the way that we are packaging them in our boxes to ship. I mean, we will pack them and kick them across our warehouse, and try to make sure that all of our processes still stay intact while we're using the most sustainable practices. And with e-commerce, that's a lot of what I see in very large brands where they can claim a sustainable concept, but it is completely lost when it comes to their shipping and the process there. And we want to see that through from the product development all the way to getting our products in our customer hands. So everything from the biodegradable paper that we wrap our products in, and this is glass. So there's a lot of really intricate wrapping that has to be done that's appropriate to keep that container intact. We use biodegradable, peanuts that dissolve with water. This is another thing. And the kids love it of customers, right? They think it's a cool science project, but it actually is really, really good also for a product and the integrity of that because it has a cooling effect versus non-biodegradable peanuts. I thought that was fascinating when we learned that with our packaging specialist. Um, Everything from, the life cycle of not just our products, but the life cycle of that bottle or that container is very important to us. With the glass bottles, a lot of our customers, we send a lot of information in blogs as well, Tiffany, when we're really doing our sustainability teaching and education, is the reuse opportunities within certain packages, from our jars to our bottles. Kids love to make their potions in them. That's one thing, but also using, like, you're using your tin after 7 years or 6 years, you stated, still deeming that appropriate and safe. And so letting people know that you can use this as a container and a reuse purpose, but also the safety measure that is there is also worth considering and worth a part of that conversation.
Eva, this is a lot to take in and ties directly into your field. What's your take?
Yeah, thank you, Holly. I think Allison and Tiffany really hit the nail on the head. And I think it's, for me, the hairspray moment isn't one particular product. Instead, it's really been our shift away from circularity and our current culture of convenience and disposability, which leads to a tremendous amount of waste and a huge environmental impact. And I think that also collides with the fact that we don't have a lot of substantiation or regulation. And so it's a perfect storm. So I think the thing that I would ask patients to do and consumers to do is what we've all started doing much more in recent years and decades with our food, is asking where it comes from, and that we can do with our health, with our skincare products as well. And so I think sourcing, transparency, and vetting our products is really essential. And it's been mentioned that this is happening now in the EU with their greenwashing directive, where they're really forcing consumer brands to back up every single claim with data, for LCAs and certification. So I think this is where consumers asking that question and demanding that information can really shift the tide, and lead us to a place where we have more information about the products that we're using and can make healthier and more informed decisions. I also think it's a really confusing market out there. And so, I would say ask your dermatologist what products to use. I think we're all going to recommend a simple regimen, fragrance-free, healthier ingredients. That's kind of a mainstay in dermatology. Less is always more. But if you don't have a dermatologist, or you're in the store and need to make a decision on the fly, there's some nice mobile apps that people can use, like Plastic Free Future. And then there's also a scoring system that some companies are adopting, which is the Echo Beauty Score. It's being used a lot, especially across the pond. So those would be just a few minor tips I would recommend.
And related to what you were saying, we have a question. Could you talk more about sunscreen, particularly the mineral sunscreen versus the Korean sunscreen versus BPA that are sold in most retail stores? So take it away on that one.
Sure. So when we talk about sunscreens, we often divide them into mineral sunscreens and chemical sunscreens. So a lot of the chemical sunscreens contain UV filters. I mentioned those earlier. And so that can include things like oxybenzone, which is commonly found in sunscreen. Avobenzone is another one, versus the mineral sunscreens, which are basically zinc and titanium dioxide. And so we feel like in general that the mineral sunscreens are probably healthier for the environment, and also maybe better for our skin. So data has shown that we can absorb some of these UV filters through our skin into our bodies. There's been measurable amounts detected in things like urine. We don't know what that means. Just because it's in our body doesn't mean it's necessarily bad for our body. So that harkens back to what I was saying at the beginning, where association and causation are two different things. But certainly that does raise questions and concerns when we know that some of these chemicals can be endocrine disruptors and can have potential health impacts in high enough concentrations. So I think for people who are worried about the sunscreens that they're using, I would always say that buying a mineral-based sunscreen is probably better for your skin. And then there's other ways to avoid even putting sunscreen on your skin in the first place, using UV protective clothing, which covers a large area of your body if you're using long pants and long sleeve shirts, and that can minimize the amount of product you have to put on your skin to begin with, and that leaves smaller areas that need application.
I might also mention something. I don't know if I told you this, Holly, but I worked for several years for DSM Firmenich, which is now the company that is spearheading the new sunscreen that is the UVA absorber added to the US monograph. And it's existed for decades, but has taken this long for the FDA to approve and review, and it has been used in other regions of the world. Um, and what's funny is, as an eczema sufferer, and I'm sure Dr. Parker sees a lot of people like this, and maybe even yourself, Allyson, when they come in and they have a skin condition. I actually was working for this company prior to knowledge of my skin sensitivity to the organic chemical sunscreens, and had to find and vet on my own while working for the largest sunscreen manufacturer, or one of the largest in the world, um, mineral based sunscreens, because of how they reacted differently onto my skin. So I feel like sun care is like such a polarizing topic due to that sensitivity that can occur, and how difficult it is to formulate those products here in the US with very limited sun filter choices. And then to add the layer of what you were discussing, Dr. Parker, just overall, like what marketing to consumers say. I feel like one of the biggest misnomers is that people believe mineral sunscreens are a physical blocker, and that it has no electronic transport or frequency the same way that the organic filters do. And actually, that's incorrect. They are a mineral physical blocker, and they do also transfer electrons as well. So there's just such a load of information that is difficult to unpack for consumers. And so the simplistic message kind of wins. But I completely agree. Like, as someone who has like very sensitive skin, I've actually found zinc oxide and titanium dioxide are the two filters that I can use. That there are many skin sensitization studies on the organic filters, like the avobenzone, the octocrylene, the homosylates, the salicylates. And now even consumers should be looking at their inactive ingredients too, because sometimes the inactive ingredients can have a category of boosters, which also help the sunscreen function at a higher SPF level, but don't have to be in the active ingredient list, and also can absorb into the skin but act as an organic filter booster, which is very common in the Korean sunscreens. And other sun filters across the world. And those boosters have been in the market, I think, for about the last 10 years. So even mineral sunscreens that claim mineral ingredients will then have that in there and potentially cause some irritation to the skin. So just to give a little bit more background, because I worked for those companies for 5 years, and they're so interesting in the stage that it's set right now, and why people believe, Korean sun care and European sun care is so much better than the US. They've just had more ingredients to work with, especially in the UVA absorption range, which is so important. But any sunscreen you use daily, and I say this all the time, is more important, regardless of what it is, than not using it at all. And I think that's like the big message that we have to say. I don't know if you agree also, Dr. Parker. I mean,
Yes.
you can speak to that as well. I feel like the fear mongering around the technology then makes people potentially adapt bad habits of saying, okay, I shouldn't use anything at all. Anything you put on the screen, whether it's clothes or, and maybe multiple, like use your daily sun care item that's a sunscreen, and use your layers, because you're probably not realizing how much incidental sun exposure you're getting from windows, from walking outside, from reflection of the ground, the beach that you go to. It's an everyday environmental need to protect yourself.
No, I would echo that 100%. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I sometimes have patients say, well, I heard sunscreen causes cancer. And so,
Oh,
you have to reframe that, to remind people that UV is radiation and it's not healthy for our skin. And so protecting daily is essential.
I think as a
After
pharmacist, there's one more thing that we can talk about, like when it comes to chemical versus mineral, that I consider in formulation of skincare products is, titanium dioxide and zinc oxide are your two main mineral choices for or a sunscreen. And from a pharmacist perspective, let's consider, like a heart medication. We don't even need to name one. Let's just say a beta blocker. There's so many different indications for that specific category and family of medications. And so a lot of times, people in general, humans, we get caught on this is what I need to treat. So this is what this ingredient will do without considering the other things that that ingredient can do. It could be to the other systems in your body, other organ systems, or it could be beneficial. So, zinc oxide, we work with zinc oxide, and a lot of people don't understand or actually just don't know as a consumer, zinc oxide has some incredible skin healing and soothing capabilities as that actual ingredient. So a lot of people would focus on just looking at these on the back of a sunscreen bottle versus a chemical and not consider whether it's mineral or chemical, not considering what are the other things that these specific ingredients can do, right or wrong. Iron oxides, this is another one that in formulations, this is a tint, right? So let's say a tinted foundation, a tinted moisturizer, a tinted sunscreen. There are some really wonderful skin soothing capabilities in iron oxides. But again, it all comes back to how were these sustainably harvested? How were they extracted? In the methods, that's where a lot of that activity can be lost. So, a lot of consumers are in this fear mongering capacity because of a lot of propaganda surrounding chemical versus mineral. But the way I guess my mind thinks of it from just cosmetic chemistry, but also pharmacy, is what else can that ingredient do outside of the blinders we have on of a UV filter, whether it is blocking on the skin or absorb it into the skin and, radiating this UV radiation off. Is there more benefit? Is there more non-benefit? Is there more harm with that? So a lot of people don't know that about zinc oxide, and that's a really big thing that we have, and we don't formulate sunscreen. We have this in an incredible signature scar salve, and the wound healing capacities of that while also protecting from the sun and the hyperpigmentation that comes to a scar. So I think looking at ingredients, people that really can appreciate turning on the back of the bottle and reading an ingredient label, knowing how to actually break that down within 5 to 10% of an estimate of an ingredient listing, whether it's food or a cosmetic, is incredibly important in the education piece to consumers. But then also thinking, what does that drug, that medication, or that ingredient do besides the one thing that I have been taught to put blinders on that is the only thing it can do?
I feel like I need one of you to go with me every time I go to buy something that may have a chemical or mineral there. I'm currently thinking I just need to like squeeze some lemon juice onto my skin and hope for the best because it's probably not great.
Let's not do that.
Okay, let's not do that. Let's not.
and don't go in the sun after. Don't squeeze
Yeah.
lemon
Okay,
juice
all right.
on
We'll
your
see if it
No.
works. So
So
my idea is
1980s.
terrible. I'm curious about what you all would tell people to do, one change that they can make on Monday. Or that's usually the question when this is more towards hospital staff or clinicians. It's kind of what can you take back to work on day one and begin to work on. But this also might apply to the personal realm too. What's one thing that you can do to make a change? Um,
I can.
Allison? Oh,
Oh, I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to start. I didn't know if Dr. Parker, you're welcome to start. I was just
So
following our round. Um, I think that for me, sustainability is such a broad concept and it can be overwhelming for a lot of people. And it's one thing to say, okay, well, I'm going to recycle or, I'm going to turn the water off and the lights off and things like that. Those are always going to be amazing things. But I think as a pharmacist, I think in systems every decision has a downstream effect. So where my mind is now is always from a formulation and a founder perspective. So if I'm evaluating an ingredient, I'm not just thinking like, how does this work? What is the actual efficacy of this ingredient? Obviously, that's the most important because that is the in the final product. But I'm always so thinking like, where did it come from? How was it harvested? What were their practices? Can they be transparent with me? And I think when it comes to hospital supply chains, one thing that I would encourage them, and consumers too, is that sustainability and quality are not competing priorities. They can go hand in hand, but they are a part of that same story. I think they reinforce each other, and they can. You know, a high quality ingredient or formula that is not sustainably harvested means nothing. And vice versa, the most environmentally friendly packaging that does not protect the integrity of an actual ingredient also means nothing. So I think that they reinforce each other, whether it's a hospital supply chain, whether it's a cosmetic, formula, um, or just a natural consumer, like thinking about them going hand in hand. And sustainability is not perfect. It is the culmination of 1,000 different little pieces of decisions that, like I was mentioning, those downstream effects. And so I think, for me personally, the transparency when I am sourcing ingredients, not just from the evaluation standpoint that I mentioned earlier, but the transparency that I'm going to have with a vendor. If they can provide me with complete transparency of their sustainability practices as well as their growing and their harvesting practices, I'm going to be much more comfortable using that vendor for our products and then also for our customers as well.
So for me as a physician, I think this is really a clinical imperative. And so when I think about what people can do on Monday morning or tomorrow morning, I think the number one thing is that we should really treat the environment as a key patient-facing variable. And we need to consider both its impact on patients, so how the environment and climate impacts our patients, but also the impact of our own care on the environment and the detrimental feedback loops that healthcare related environmental harms can create just not only for the patients right in front of us, but for larger scale population health. And so I think there's a few key things that we can do. One is I think as a physician, and if we're in healthcare, whether you're a pharmacist or in allied health in another way, is to start asking about pharmacy and supply chains, which Allyson alluded to. I think that's a really important question in terms of where are our products coming from? Where are we minimizing single-use plastics? What are vendors doing to increase sustainability and minimize greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage? I think the second thing is counseling our patients. Education is so important. So we have to educate ourselves so then we can educate our patients. And so I think, from a skincare standpoint, just counseling patients on proper skincare ingredients, simplified regimens, what ingredients to avoid, what ingredients to look for is very easy and scalable. And as a physician who counsels patients all day long, I think the one thing I hear from other physicians is I don't have time for that. But these are conversations that can be easily inserted into the counseling we already do. It's like it's a one-liner. It takes a few seconds to add this information in, and I think it's incredibly valuable for our patients to provide them with this sort of knowledgeable foundation of how they should be purchasing products and applying to their skin. And then I think as physicians, we have to step back and also look at how much we prescribe, what products are we recommending, what are we doing in clinic to minimize our waste? Are we segregating it properly? Are we opening unnecessary things on our trays? Can we minimize what we're doing to therefore minimize environmental impact?
We have
So
a
I think my takeaway is ask questions and think.
we have a quick follow-up to what you were saying, Eva from a family medicine physician.
Yeah.
She wants to know, where would you advise physicians to direct patients with consumer questions about the best products?
Yeah, so I think the two references that I mentioned earlier, that plastic-free future and the Eco Beauty Score, are two really good places to start. I am not, I'm a physician, so I'm not here as a brand representative, so I want to avoid necessarily recommending specific brands on this webinar because I don't think that's my place. And to be quite frank, formulations change, things change. And so any recommendation today may not be uh, the same recommendation I would make 6 months from now. But I think doing some research on your own to find a handful of products that you can recommend to your patients for anti-aging, for moisturization, and for sunscreens, and then have that as a handout that you can either give to the patient physically or more sustainably add it into the after visit summary in your EMR so they can access it electronically.
I've put links to both of those into the chat, the EcoCert and also the plastic-free feature.
Awesome. Thank you.
Tiffany, your takeaway, first action steps.
I feel like I'm echoing what's already been said, but it really holds true to even how I determine what I need or what I'm going to do. But it's the idea of quality, fewer but better. And to get there, it's true. Asking the questions, becoming a bit more educated, basically fighting the what seems to be the massive acceptable way to just trigger purchase products for the sake of newness, and fight that urge in the sake of why not dig a little deeper? Like, how badly do you need something immediately? At what cost does that come to you? And also just remembering that with every decision that you make, no matter how small, that impact adds up over time. One purchase you don't make today because you wanted to research it and then realized that perhaps the company you didn't want to support is the real owner of that brand. um, that maybe the ingredients, once you deep dive after a day or two, you realize were not something that you really wanted to support in purchasing either. It's really just that thought process, because at the end of the day, there are so many people on this planet and so many of us that have our inner circles of influence. And it is the fewer that speak to those, like, hey, don't make a snap decision, like do a little bit more research, ask the questions, and then you might actually find something that you're so happy with, and that it lasts such a long time, and that the company, platform and how they put together the products are exactly what you want to support. That is kind of the real win. Now, to say that it's easy to do that is really difficult. So making some steps and just picking a few things and making the best decisions possible with the information you have now, and then learning along the way and giving yourself grace to make mistakes, because it is an imperfect system that we're all operating in. So trying to start with perfection oftentimes can freeze you into making no decisions whatsoever. Would be really my takeaways. And the fact of the matter is, you'll be happier for it, having less things, but things that you love and like find that are quality and actually work for what you want them to do, whether it's hair care, whether it's food products, whether it's something that you're going to have in your home versus having it break and having to throw it away and having no circularity whatsoever. I feel like takes away a lot of that joy, at least for me and the people that I know. You want to fall in love with quality versus quantity.
These were all great. And also, I would just like to point out that my dog was protecting me from, I believe, maybe the UPS man. That was it. So, anyway, I am safe from the delivery guy. This has been a great panel, and I am looking forward to kind of the recap and the sharing that we do on LinkedIn. I'm going to put these links that you all have talked about and share those out. And of course, this will be posted on YouTube, and we will send out an email to people who registered but weren't able to make it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Holly.
Thanks.
Thanks, Holly, so much for having me.
It
Of
was
course.
nice to
Have a
meet
good one.
everybody.
You
Yes, it's
too.
great to meet you.
All right,
Bye.
bye.